to Ethical and Transparent AI. In our panel session, we will discover insights from NSF awardees, lessons learned, and best practices for ethical and transparent AI. This interactive session will talk about key principles guiding AI development, practical steps you can take to implement ethical AI frameworks, and different governance processes. This interactive panel will feature various faculty from various universities discussing AI development and different processes. We are joined today by Emily LaRosa, Dr. Vibhuti Gupta, and Dr. Todd Gary. In this particular session, we'll talk about various themes and objectives to further discuss AI trustworthiness and ethical behavior of AI systems. We are joined by Emily LaRosa, and I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. I know, second session of the day, we're still a bit groggy, probably need a little more coffee like myself, but I'm very excited to be here. As I have been introduced, my name is Emily LaRosa, and I'm actually a PhD candidate at Michigan State University. My research focuses on AI and social trust dynamics. So how can we make AI more trustworthy? What are we doing when we actually deploy these systems, and in what way can we make them appropriately transparent? I work on regulatory capture, agentially grounded trust, and appropriate AI information sharing with different publics. And my projects include information sharing frameworks, a community-based research, and iterative regulatory frameworks. So essentially, my overarching question is, what is appropriate transparency and trust for when we deploy AI? And when we talk about deploying AI, who are we talking about? What kinds of people are being affected? And in what ways should we actually be integrating education into that conversation? Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dr. Vibhuti Gupta.
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Vibhuti Gupta, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Data Science at Meharry. And I'm really excited in this panel. My research focuses on AI in healthcare, but specifically on developing multimodal approaches to integrate different types of data, and also considering the ethical trustworthiness and explainability of the algorithms that's being deployed and developed for healthcare domain. So I am looking forward for this panel.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Next up, we have Dr. Todd Gary.
Yeah, my name's Todd Gary. I've got several roles that I think I bring to this panel. First, as assistant professor in biomedical data science, I teach the ethics classes. So at Meharry Medical College, we teach for our students getting a PhD in biomedical data science or data science, I teach the ethical, legal, and societal issues in healthcare. And for our master's students, I teach ethics in data science and AI. Secondly, I direct our external R&D partnerships. And one of the exciting things that we were able to start this year is internships with HCA, the Hospital Corporation of America. It's one of the largest healthcare providers in the world, and probably in the world. They have up to 40 million patient visits a year, and our Meharry graduate students are doing internships in their responsible AI unit. So they're not only establishing policies, but they're working with vendors, they're looking at transparency, they're looking at good models, and then through our ethics courses, we have all of our students, when they graduate with their master's or PhD, raise their hand at graduation and take a data science oath, an AI oath that's based on the Hippocratic Oath. And I think that's very unique. And then I've done work in industry where in 2017 I was part of the team that got the AI Global Award for the best use of AI in healthcare. So I bring a lot of experience from both universities and industry. And then we did want to mention a couple of things that are going on at Meharry. Our president, James Hildreth, is well known. What I'm really excited about is he has a working lab. He understands the world of science. He writes proposals, publishes results, and it was his vision to build our school to focus around precision medicine. So he was fortunate enough to get an undergraduate degree from Harvard, a PhD from Oxford, and then his MD from Johns Hopkins is what really got him into personalized medicine. So The other thing about our school, which is really unique, is instead of a chair being the highest person in AI and data science, we have a dean and a senior vice president that meets twice a week with our president. So they've helped grow our school, which is only 4 years old. This fall, we'll have 125 master's and PhD students. President Hildreth has won several awards, but he was able to work with Regeneron, AstraZeneca, Novo Novartis, and Roche to bring about $10 million into the Together for Change project, which is trying to sequence 500,000 African American genomes for research. And then we have our master's degree rolling out this fall in AI, cybersecurity, bioinformatics, and computer science.
Thank you, Dr. Gary. Well, let's go to our first panelist question, and this is designed to be interactive, so we have a Slido QR there for you to scan. So our first question is, how would you define ethical AI, and what are the key principles that should guide its development?
I'm happy to take this first. To me, ethical AI can't be defined solely by abstract principles or industry checklists. It actually needs to be grounded in the specific context in which AI is developed and deployed. And so it needs to be responsive to its environment, attentive to the lived experiences of those it affects, and structured to ensure accountability, transparency, and justice. It doesn't just avoid harm, it actually promotes equity and democratic participation through its use. And so the key principles that I would push for are contextual integrity, where ethical AI must respect the norms and expectations of communities in which it operates, meaning being attentive to privacy, power asymmetries, and local epistemologies, and not assuming that a one-size-fits-all standard suffices. We also need participatory design and governance, epistemic pluralism, where AI should integrate diverse forms of knowledge, including traditional knowledges, labor experience, and community-based expertise. And we need transparency with accountability, because transparency is necessary but insufficient alone. And when accompanied by mechanisms like third-party audits or algorithmic registries, we can ensure meaningful oversight and redress, not just blasé information dumps.
I will go next. For ethical AI, I will explain in terms of computational perspective. So, in my opinion, ethical AI is something that is a set of ethical guidelines that needs to be followed and adhered so as to minimize harm to the society. It will also include the legal regulations, which requires the ethical use of AI in the society. In terms of data cycle, we can say that ethical AI is has to be implemented in each and every stage of the projects. Starting from the data when it is being collected, we have to make sure that the data is not biased towards specific ethnicity or race. Then going into building models, we have to consider that while building the models, they are not kind of biased. And even on the output side, when we go into coming with the outcomes of these algorithms, we have to monitor and audit that the outcomes are fair towards everybody. So some of the key principles that I think should guide us for the development is transparency. We have to consider the explainability and interpretability of the algorithms that we are designing. We have to consider the fairness part, which includes identifying and mitigating biases within the data as well as in the models. Then non-maleficence, which means our system should not harm people. And then the responsibility, security, and privacy.
Yeah, and then following both of them, they both mentioned fairness, they both mentioned transparency, and that's important in the definition that I'm going to share with you. Another one is respect. And so I think a strong definition of ethical AI is the development and deployment of AI systems that prioritize fairness, transparency, accountability, and respect for human values to ensure that the societal benefits are increased and the harm is minimized. And then I like to think of AI ethics as a compass that guides the practitioner, that guides the developers and the deployers, so that in a compass, you're going for true north, and you're planning to chart your course, but you can adopt as things come up and you find that it's maybe doing harm or it's not being as beneficial.
Thank you. Well, many of our institutions are establishing new policies for implementing ethical AI, but is there any advice that you'd offer institutions or individuals who are just starting to engage with ethical and transparent AI?
I absolutely have a couple of key points here that I'd like to hit. I think you need to start with the context of development, not just the code, or deployment rather, not just the code, and you need to build ethics into the process of creating the system instead of focusing solely on the output being ethical. We also need to create space for challenging, dissenting, and co-learning, especially for those who bring perspectives historically excluded from tech development. Transparency as well isn't just about making systems visible, it's about making them intelligible and responsive to different ways of knowing. And we need to remember that as we try to make these systems transparent within our communities.
Following that, I think definitely we have to invest in the transparency side of it, and we should have clear guidelines to design these ethical AI frameworks. We have to continuously monitor and audit within the project life cycle for complying with the regulations and standards, as well as we have to address bias and fairness very proactively rather than once the outcomes are coming out. So we have to be very proactive in monitoring the bias and fairness within the models as well as in the data.
Yeah. For an institution, I would advise that you take AI as seriously as you take cybersecurity, and that maybe you couple the teams working together, because cybersecurity, you're definitely on defense from the outside or any internal thing, but AI can also be a threat if it's misused. Often employees want to bring their AI to work, and so that needs to be vetted and looked at. So my advice for institutions is to take it seriously. For individuals that are just starting to engage, two things to be aware of as an individual is an over-reliance. I could imagine if you're starting to use AI as a high school or a middle school student, all of a sudden you just become so over-reliant, you're not learning yourself. You become kind of lazy. So you don't want the over-reliance, and you don't want to trust it fully. It gets things wrong, and it can send you in the wrong direction.
Question. So we have a live question here. And this is more of a pathways question. Should we address AI education in K-12 and then reinforce it in higher education?
So, with regards to addressing...
Yeah, so, if you're looking at AI, we've got K-12 pathways, should we introduce it first to K-12 students and then reinforce it in higher ed?
I do have an opinion on this, and I would say that it echoes our keynote yesterday, in that I think that there are certain avenues of AI that require reflection and responsiveness that certain age groups just don't have at this stage. I think that we can definitely educate how to use AI, we can educate on AI, but in terms of AI development itself, I think it's erroneous to say that that K through 12 should be developing them at this stage.
Fantastic. So, we look at our different institutions and our different organizations. How should ethical considerations factor into AI education and training programs?
So I will. I would say that. We have to develop the curriculum and integrate the ethical considerations while even starting from the K-12 education. And we not only have to train students, but also have to train educators so that they can disseminate this knowledge to the students, even on the K-12 side. And I think that AI is progressing very fast. So we have to make sure that the young people will know the benefits as well as the harms for that. Because if they don't know about the harms, they might be mistaken in using these tools and might be blindly trust them. So that is a very important part. And I would say that these curriculums not only have to be implemented on the school level, but also on the university level. We should have a course on ethics when we are teaching students for AI and machine learning. And we have to provide trainings, even like the hands-on trainings to the people to know about how these tools, what are the benefits and what are some of the mistakes that can be done and avoided when using these tools.
And, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'd like to echo that by saying that we need to train AI practitioners not to be only fluent in technical approaches, but in ethical literacy. How to understand power, context, and the social implications of their work is really crucial. And ethics should be, and must be, to me, integrated across technical training and not isolated in philosophy electives. Students should learn critically to examine data set composition, algorithmic opacity, and downstream effects alongside model accuracy and performance metrics, which means teaching them to ask, who is impacted by this system? What assumptions are being coded in, and whose knowledge is being excluded? And these questions are core and critical to the ethical considerations for AI education and training programs.
Right. And I do think it takes the community. I think it takes the educators, the parents, especially when you're dealing with elementary and middle school students. My wife has taught fourth grade for 25 years. I know the world of a 10-year-old. Even though she might bring the best to the class, the students are going to do things with AI on their own, and you need to build a community of trust where they can share, and their parents will know what's going on, the educators will know, and through that, hopefully, through that trust and community, we can come up with some best practices.
It's a good lead into our next question. Are there any practical steps that institutions and companies can take to implement these ethical frameworks and governance processes?
I can throw out what we're doing with the Hospital Corporation of America, HCA. They have 309,000 employees, and they have 4 people working in responsible AI. And so they're working with almost 3,000 different facilities across the United States. And every employee wants to bring AI to work. One of their favorites is Grammarly. They don't want to make any spelling mistakes in a email address or a Word document, and they don't want their bosses to think that their grammar's not right or something. So they really want to bring Grammarly to work. So we were working with part of their team at HCA to look at Grammarly. And so they went to the company and they said, how are you using this data? And they said, well, we need to know every single keystroke so we can train all of our models. And so if you're typing in a patient name or something like that, that gets recorded. And then in their contract, they say that they share their data with third-party vendors, which could be other hospitals. So you're violating HIPAA laws with the patients. And then they said, where are your server farms? And they said, well, the cheapest ones we could find were in Estonia. So they're not even in the US. So then it becomes really hard to go to the employees and say, you cannot use Grammarly at work. Here's the reasons. And people are like, but I still want to use it. And then you have a lot of vendors coming to them, and these are some of the practical steps that they're looking at is as they try to vet the vendors are like, we just want to build our algorithms based on the data of your patients. And so, companies are really having trouble, and not all companies have a responsible AI policy or a team. So it's a very challenging time.
Yeah, to take that and expand it out into some core principles that might be a good takeaway, I would say build participatory structures, involve your impacted communities, domain expert, and frontline workers early and continuously in the AI lifecycle. Establish algorithmic registries and change logs, so try to maintain transparent, accessible records of how the AI systems function, how often they're updated, and under what assumptions they were updated. And then contextual risk and impact assessments should be mandatory, as well as institutionalizing post-market surveillance, because AI doesn't stop evolving once it's deployed. And like pharmaceuticals or autonomous vehicles, AI systems should be subject to ongoing monitoring with mechanisms for community reporting, redress, and rollback if we actually do assess environmental or sustainable harms.
Yeah, I would also say that there should be separate teams within the companies for dealing with the responsible AI part of the AI lifecycle, and there should be they should be collaborative with all the development teams that are basically involved, and also with the stakeholders who will be using those systems.
So what do you see as the biggest ethical challenge or risk associated with our various AI systems today?
I would say epistemic exclusion, because marginalization of the very people affected most by these systems is actually an incredible issue. AI systems are often trained on data that reflect dominant perspectives while excluding local knowledge, and that's a big problem. And we also face the problem of opaque decision-making in high-stakes environments, where AI increasingly mediates across access to critical resources, and those who are impacted have no visibility into how decisions are made or how to challenge them. And it's this challenge point that I'd like to push on. So the challenge is not just identifying individual risks, but transforming the processes and power structures that shape how AI is conceived, built, and governed here.
Yeah, I agree with Emily. I think the most some of the risks that we can think of is that the bias and discrimination, definitely, because all these systems which are being developed, either hiring algorithms, facial recognition systems, when people are applying for jobs, those are also kind of screened through these AI systems. And there is a lot of gap in that part, that we just trust on those algorithms to come up with the decisions. And specifically in the healthcare or clinical field, if we do not address this on time, the models that we are deploying within the hospitals and clinics, that might have greater impact and not be generalizable to everyone. Another bigger challenge will be the lack of transparency and explainability. For example, there are a lot of deep learning systems that are running, but we have to consider that they should not be black boxes, and we should be accountable for any outcomes that's being generated from these systems. The privacy and security is another one, but also we have to consider that as these AI systems are coming in a race, specifically like after ChatGPT, we have to be cautious about what data we are entering into these systems, and because we never know how our data is being used internally. So we have to be very cautious on that side, and that could be used for misinformation or manipulation in the future.
Right. So some of the ethical challenges, one of the ones currently, and I'll give you two in the future, the current is AI scams. It's estimated that $8.8 billion were lost last year in AI fraud. That's huge. There's voice cloning. You can really do a lot with AI to take away money, especially for people that just aren't aware of what's going on. There's also currently a perception of job losses, and this sort of fits into the future. The future is energy use. The Colossus, which is a ChatGPT AI, it uses 1 million gallons of water a day. It's estimated that in 5 to 10 years of AI growth, 1/3 of all of the US energy will go to AI. How many of you have done like a Google search on an AI platform, like Perplexity or something like that? That takes up to 100 times more energy than a Google search. And so it's just this energy consumption is a problem. And then with job loss, here's another one coming from a university. Almost all AI computers and things that we're becoming really dependent on are owned by for-profit companies. I mean, Facebook, which is Alphabet, and we had the AI computer built here in Memphis, and so a server farm here in Middle Tennessee. So they're all owned on for-profit. It's not a university where there is some sort of regulation and control and transparency over what's going on. But the founder of the X Prize, Peter Diamandis, said that by early 2030, we're talking less than 10 years, that when you combined AI with humanoid robots, 1 million of those could replace almost all human work that's physically done. So how do we, I mean, that's pretty rapid. Waymo, if you're here in Nashville, you'll see driverless cars driving around. So Waymo has driven 60 million miles in driverless cars, sort of like Uber, but without a driver. So if they can do that in cars, it's looking at the future of combining robotics and AI.
And if you have a question or remark, please feel free to.
It was 100 million. They went over 100 million.
Oh, wow.
in last year.
Definitely. Over 100 million miles.
I was behind.
So how can these organizations build the transparency and explainability into these AI models and the overall decision-making process?
Well, as this is entirely my dissertation topic, I'm going to go ahead and take a stab at this. I would argue that the black box, white box dichotomy that we're taught to think about is actually false. This is not something that we should be focusing on any longer. We cannot white box our way out of this problem. These systems are far too complex, and this is not something that is worth the time. Instead, what we should be focusing on is we should be focusing on what the output metrics are, whether or not we're respecting education levels of those we're communicating with, and whether or not we have appropriate transparency surrounding that communication. And so what I actually push for is I push for creating what I call the curated information framework model that I've developed in conjunction with AgAid. And what this does is essentially it assesses who needs what information, when and how do we disseminate that information, who's responsible for sharing that information, and what are the potential damages of sharing that information, so that way we can get ahead of it. And this assessment is actually done in conjunction with all of the parties who have been assessed that need to know about the AI system. And so I actually enacted this in vivo surrounding an autonomous apple picker last summer. And what I managed to do was I managed to get 25 different actors, including First Nation, H2A workers, growers, farmers, pesticide workers, technologists developing the actual tool that was going to be used, and CS developers as well as hardware manufacturers in the same room to talk about this system and learn that, first of all, when we talk about reliance, reliability, or transparency, oftentimes we're talking past each other because we have very different definitions of these words. These words mean something vastly different to my colleagues here than it might mean to me as a philosopher. And so what we need to do is we need to have a robust conversation about how our lexicon needs to be built together and jointly before we can move forward in addressing the primary concerns of what should be shared with whom and how. Because not everyone needs to know everything at every given point. Not everyone needs to know everything in the same way. And in fact, it might actually be erroneous to assume that an H2A worker has access to the internet, first of all. And it might be completely inappropriate for us to disseminate everything in English. It may be something that we need to have a conversation about to talk about access and equity further surrounding these systems just before we even deploy them. And that's something that I think the CIF really helps us with.
Yeah, I would just add that if you really want to build your organization with transparency, you've got to really clearly communicate with everybody working for you, everybody you're working with, what data is collected, used, what's omitted, and what are the reasons behind your choices. So really being transparent, not just with the data and the AI models, but with your choices, your decisions. It would be nice if there were a continual way to monitor and check, maybe internal audits. And I'd like to see, but maybe it's just a Todd Gary wish list, that if you go to buy an organic vegetable or fruit, it's certified organic. It would really be nice if they could certify AI as trustworthy and transparent. I don't know how they would do that, but once you had that sealed, then people could increase their trust and use.
I would say that the organization should have multidisciplinary teams. Definitely, most of the time it will be. But those teams should not work in silos. However, there should be a continuous communication of what is going on in each stage of the project, and we have to check that whether on the development side and also on the deployment side. So on the development side, we know that there are people with different perspectives. There are developers who will not have the same language from the people who are the users. So definitely there should be a good communications between all the stakeholders within the process, and everyone has to know like what is going on, how is it being developed, and how will that impact in the future.
Thank you. We've got an audience question here. Is there a difference between a fair AI and an ethical AI? Is there a difference?
So I would say that both the terms are, the ethical AI is something which is a big umbrella, and we cannot define that with one single perspective, because with the computational perspective it is different, with the philosophical perspective it is different, and it has a lot of components, as we have seen, like transparency, fairness, non-maleficence, individual rights. But fairness, we can say that fair AI is a part of a big umbrella term for ethical AI. It cannot be like the same thing if we talk about ethical AI and fair AI.
I would agree with that. I think that we can definitely have ethical AI that is unfair. We can have AI that is biased appropriately to be able to create equity. And so I think that, and inherently that may be read as unfair. And I think that that's fine. I think that that creates ethical systems in some ways. So.
Yeah, they're definitely different terms. I mean, an analogy that I'm sort of thinking about is if you've ever been to any type of sporting event where there's an umpire could be fairly making the right calls, but he could be doing it maybe in an unethical way or something like that. So you could be fooled by AI saying, yes, it's fairly doing this, but behind the scenes it's doing something to kind of trick you. I mean, for the past 15 years, the smartest people in the United States have been attracted to jobs where they try to get people to click a button online. And so they might be presenting something fair, but you don't realize, what they're trying to do, and it only gets greater with AI.
We have an audience question?
Yeah. So thank you for these comments. So regarding, so we mentioned about trust and fairness. So if you give more detailed, specific prompt and asking, so how do you ensure it does not become echo chamber? So we are asking the question, but we give a detailed parameters, and so in other words, we go into silo ourselves, and based on our prompt, it is responding as what we expect it to respond.
Okay, so I'm sorry if I'm misunderstanding the question. The question is, how can we trust that we have an equitable response because of prompt engineering?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's going to be based on how the LLM is trained, and that's going to be based on what kinds of data points it's been fed and how often it's been prompted with a similar query. And I honestly don't have an answer for this particular question. I don't know if my colleagues do.
Well, what struck me was when you talked about echo chamber. And I think one of the things that we need to look for in the future of AI is trained on existing knowledge. And if you keep training AI on AI, you really need that human creativity, that human contribution to knowledge in order to grow AI in the future. I mean, it's limited by what we currently know, and I'd hate for creativity to be stalled by over-dependence on AI, in which case it just becomes an echo chamber of what's currently known.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left, so we're going to fast forward to these last two questions. How can we foster greater public trust and understanding of various AI systems and their societal impacts?
Wow.
So this is a great question and a really heavy one. But I would actually argue that it is a bit misleading because it indicates that we can trust systems themselves. We can't. As I've previously argued, we can't trust AI in a vacuum because they're not true agents. Instead, when we're trusting an AI, what we're doing is we're trusting the experts who deploy and are responsible for said system. It's the dynamic between the public and these deployer experts that need to be monitored and fostered, and these impacts need to be brought back up to appropriate transparency regarding the system over that black box, white box dichotomy that has been touted by technical experts as the binary alternative to information sharing. Because information sharing, when done poorly, can be just as harmful as not sharing at all, or can be even lead to more harmful consequences because it can motivate erroneous actions.
Yeah, I would also say that the communication is really important between the people who are using these systems and who are developing, and there should be proper documentation for each and every step, whether it is a model or anything being developed. But the biggest thing to develop trust is like there should not be working on the black box side, which is kind of not interpretable by anyone. It should be something that is well defined with the guidelines as well as with the documentation that is being provided to the stakeholders. And for example, like if we can consider ChatGPT, like a lot of people are using that, but building a trust that what is happening behind the scene, what data is being used, and how that is being trained, that is not available to everyone. So, and that is applicable to all the companies who are working and developing the systems. They will not share the documentation about how the model is being trained, what data is being used with the people. So that is kind of like very difficult question to kind of answer, to build this trust with the people with these bigger systems.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to foster a greater public trust and understanding when we ourselves are trying to navigate with that. I'll give you a highlight for the keynote speaker at lunch today. She came and spoke at Meharry, and she had an illustration that I think was really powerful, and that's from Dr. Talitha Washington. And she had, you can look at AI two ways. AI in the center with humans circling around. That's not going to foster trust and understanding. If you put the human in the center, you put AI around it, and we're in control and we're in charge, and it is being helpful and not hurtful. So it just depends on where you put the emphasis and focus.
And I think really briefly to build off of that, one of the things to remember is that trust and reliance are not the same thing. And when we foster reliance on a system, that in itself can be really damaging and can really harm our potential for building that trust that's needed to have AI flourish in a way that's beneficial for society.
Okay, and we'll kind of close this out with looking ahead. What emerging ethical issues do you foresee as AI capabilities continue to advance?
I see a combination of issues. Obviously, it's the understanding, it's the trust, it's the transparency. But I'll give you an illustration of what's going on now. And people are using AI to apply for jobs. Make sure their cover letters are fine, make sure their applications are fine. And Dr. Gupta had an opening, and in the past he'd get like 4 applications. People really honed into it. This time he got 300 applications. And so you can imagine mid-sized companies to large companies are getting 200 times the number of applications they used to get. So they're using AI to do that. And there's a mistrust in the applications and a mistrust in the screening. So the whole area of something we used to do as simple as writing and applying is an emerging ethical issue, I think. And then secondly, I just wanted to end, if this is our last question, on a hopeful note. I teach computational structural biology at Meharry, and it's very important in drug design to understand the 3D molecules, how they meet, how they interact, how they bind. It took 50 years to determine the 3-dimensional structure of the first molecule, and they got the Nobel Prize. And recently, we understood 10,000 proteins at that level. Google DeepMind in the matter of months, now knows to 95% accuracy 200 million molecules. So to go from a small number to that number, we have to rethink how we're teaching. It's going to make great advancements in drug design and discovery, but how do we grapple with something that is advancing so rapidly?
Thank you.
So I would say trust is the biggest issue that we can foresee, and that's again very challenging to build that. For example, even there are a lot of AI applications in healthcare, but me myself, if I have something, I will not trust on a system that will treat me. Similarly, for if you can see on the education system, these systems will basically hamper the natural way of learning to the students. It definitely accelerate or assist you, and even it assists educators in a lot of other ways to write research papers, to do critical, kind of solving problems. But it will hamper the critical thinking skills of the people, because when you learn from the scratch, it will take some time. But nowadays, because the tools are available, that process is all gone. So that will definitely be another issue. Even if you see on the self-driving cars or the systems that are being developed, definitely it will assist you, but what will happen if there is a 1% chance of failure? So trust is the biggest issue that we can see in all these systems.
And I actually have several, but in the interest of time and with respect to the person who's waiting to ask a question, I would say that we're going to see AI systems not just automating tasks, but mediating decision-making in deeply relational and normative domains like healthcare, education, environmental management, and food systems. And the risk here isn't just technical error. It's that these systems are going to harden dominant assumptions about what counts as valid knowledge, who gets to decide, and whose futures are worth optimizing for. And we need to be really aware of that as we develop these systems and allow them to take part in our lives.
We've got time for an audience question.
Slurp data, and they're buying other companies like Roomba to map your house and Waze to I'm sure you all know this, but they're just gathering up all this data and selling it. And so my question is, and you've touched on this a little bit, and I really appreciate that. I'd like to ask a little bit more in depth, but how do we ensure that students, that the developers of these applications and education apps are building ethically responsible applications, and they're not just motivated by just selling these, getting bought out by these bigger companies to slurp up this data and make a pile of money out of something that they originally thought was something that was really beneficial, and it turned out just to be another way to sell products.
Well, again, I would push to, I would echo my colleagues and say, push against the silo model. Saying that philosophy or saying that ethics is something we can tack on at the end, or it's something that should be a module of a particular course, is insufficient. We need to be integrating engineering ethics into every course that we teach our students, and we need to have it now. We also need to have it in a way that is actually meaningful and successful, and that means not just talking about the success stories, but also articulating the fail points and talk about who it affected, harmed, and how it was mitigated afterwards. Because those mitigation stories are actually going to be impactful as well. So a great example that I like to use is the Challenger crash of 1997 is a really powerful example to my students, because it shows that these engineers did what they were told. They did their best. They thought that they were following suit of what the protocol was. And the O-rings failed because even though they knew that they were insufficient, they also were told that it needed to be pushed through because of bureaucracy. And having them remember, no, your ethics, your code of conduct has to do with whether or not you say no, or you stand up, or you try to integrate other avenues of solutions, has a lot to do with this.
Yeah, I completely agree with my colleague that we have to integrate ethics in the courses that we are teaching. So instead of always telling about the benefits, that's really important, but we also have to teach them about the failures and the mistakes. For as an instance, like for GPT, if they are using that, we might have to integrate some assignments in the way that definitely they can use ChatGPT and get some responses, but how to analyze that response in terms of ethical framework. What is wrong and what is right in that response? And whenever you are using any AI application, are you asking yourself that the response that I'm getting, do I have to trust it or not? So you always have that thing in your mind that I do not have to blindly use AI systems. I always have to ask myself whether it is within the ethics or not.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just really proud of MSCC. I've spent about 20 years teaching at 2 HBCUs, and I notice students that come from marginalized backgrounds really want to make society better. They really want to push the edge. They don't want to sell out to profit. They bring with them a hunger to make the world a better place, and I think that's a huge difference. At Meharry, nationwide, 3% of data science, computer science, AI students are African American, and our program is closer to 90 or 95%. So I think we're bringing a new type of interest, a new type of student that will probably change some of the business models. There's an example in our audience. Lonnie, will you raise your hand? This is the future Dr. Lonnie Taylor. She wants to start a company. She's got some great ideas, and I don't think she would just say, she's like, this is my passion. This is what I want to do with my life. I want to be able to help people. I can't remember if it's with spinal cord injuries or exactly what it is, but I know that when I visit her 10 years from now, she'll be doing that. So I think looking at the Hispanic serving institutions, the tribal colleges, this organization is really going to bring a lot to the question that you had, and I'm looking forward to that future.
All right, well, thank you, panelists. This concludes our ethical and transparent AI panel. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.